Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, January 19th. And tonight, we learn more about this week's discovery of possible unmarked graves at a former residential school site near Kenora, Ontario. Wauzhushk Onigum First Nation chief Chris Skeed says hurt is still alive in his community. Studies were being conducted by the First Nations technical, archaeological, and ground-penetrating radar teams since May. They were informed by testimony from survivors. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has said the school was attended by more than 6,000 Indigenous children between 1897 and 1972. Most of the findings were unmarked, except for 5 with grave markers. The National Capital Commission's Board of Directors has voted to rename Ottawa's Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. The new name will be determined by the board in June, following consultations with Indigenous partners. The renaming process got underway after 3 city councillors sent a letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They were urging the federal government to facilitate an Indigenous-led consultation to rename the roadway. Mr. Macdonald authorized the creation of the residential school system in the 1880s. Meanwhile, members of a federal committee overseeing government operations have unanimously voted to launch a parliamentary inquiry into contracts awarded to a consulting firm. McKinsey & Company recently came into the spotlight. This was after news reports highlighted the rapid growth of the company's work with the Prime Minister's government. Ottawa says it was awarded 23 contracts to McKinsey since 2015 that are together worth over $100 million. The committee will review contracts awarded to the firm since 2011 and plans to ask several cabinet ministers to testify. Turning to Alberta now, where the CEOs of some of the biggest oil sands companies in the province seem to have a positive reaction toward green initiatives. They say transitioning their workforce for a net zero emissions future isn't about cutting jobs, it's about creating them. Cenovus CEO Alex Pourbaix says the industry will spend about $70 billion over the next 30 years to decarbonize the production of the oil sands, creating up to 35,000 jobs. Cenovus is one of 6 oil sands companies in the Pathways Alliance, which is a consortium created to work together to decarbonize their production entirely by 2050. All right, switching gears to a new Statistics Canada report, which looks at the demographics of those who earn university degrees versus those who get jobs. Now, according to the study, many racialized populations in the country are more likely than their white counterparts to earn a university degree. But the numbers show that racialized people are less likely to find a job that pays well. The findings are based on data from the 2021 and 2016 censuses. The federal agency says that 2 years after graduating, people of color reported lower employment earnings and lower rates of unionization and pension plan coverage. All right, taking a look at air travel in Canada now. Experts say the boom in low-cost airlines is fueling a shortage of qualified pilots. With promises of cheaper fares and no unnecessary frills, a flurry of discount airlines has burst into the Canadian scene in the last few years. But experts say the business model is worsening an already existing pilot shortage, which could become an even bigger problem for the country's aviation industry in the coming years. All right, turning to major moves in Ontario. Premier Doug Ford says upcoming legislation would see credentials of healthcare workers registered in other provinces and territories recognized in Ontario automatically. Mr. Ford says the government plans to introduce the legislation next month. He says it would allow healthcare professionals to work without registering with a regulatory college in Ontario. It would allow workers such as doctors and nurses looking to move to Ontario to get to work as soon as they arrive. The province says the changes would mark the first step toward a pan-Canadian portable registration model. Now, meanwhile, some Nova Scotia doctors worry that government changes intended to improve provincial emergency rooms will not work. A group of 39 ER doctors in Halifax sent an open letter to Premier Tim Houston. They say the real problem is the, quote, overuse of emergency departments, which lack bed space. Get ready for some nostalgia. A list of the first 25 Zellers locations that will open inside select Hudson Bay department stores across Canada is out. Hudson's Bay Company says 5 of the locations will be in Quebec, 9 sites have been allotted to Ontario, and 4 will be in BC. 5 locations will be in the prairies, and 2 will be in Nova Scotia. The company is trying to revive the Zellers banner a decade after the discount chain closed most of its stores in the country. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break, and we're going to be taking a look at Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray up next. All right, welcome back. Up now, we have Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Seema. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. We are seeing North American equity markets trend a little bit lower today, but that does certainly follow a very nice rally to start 2023. Just stepping back in terms of why we've seen the rally, a couple of really important points here. One is that investors believe that we will get a soft economic landing, not a hard landing from all the rate rises that we've been seeing. We're also noticing that CPI, of course, has been trending lower both in Canada as well as the United States, leading many investors to believe that the U.S. Federal Reserve will not need to tighten as aggressively, perhaps as previously planned or as previously said. Also, we are seeing that U.S. dollar down by about 11% from its September peak. That's a bit of a tailwind for many corporate earnings in the United States as well as around the world. There's also the view that the European economy is less bad. Remember, often in markets, less bad is good. And this is really driven by the warmer winter than expected in Europe, and therefore less energy costs impacting the consumer and the consumer demand. So less dampening of the consumer in Europe is certainly a bit of a positive as it relates to the markets and the outlook. China opening up, also another tailwind to the broader market movement higher. We're seeing that in the price of copper, which is up by about 11% or 10% over the past month or so. WTI up by about 5% over the past month. There is the belief, of course, that opening up China will unleash the consumer demand and the pent-up demand that perhaps they have been feeling. You're also seeing economists actually raise their outlook for China's GDP to just over 5%. So that's certainly a big positive. And we, of course, know how large their economy is and the impact that that has on so many companies and so many products around the world. Now, having said that, we have had some disappointing economic data as of late. So there is, of course, a bear case as well. And it really is still a bit of a tug of war between the bull and the bear case right now as we start out the year. The bear case, we have had some disappointing economic data, such as retail sales, as well as the New York Empire manufacturing data. On the positive side, we did actually get some good economic data today, specifically initial jobless claims and the Philly Fed manufacturing data, and also housing starts, very important. Housing starts were a little bit better than expected as well. But the bear case, there's still a lot of concerns in terms of the fourth quarter earnings results, which continue to pour out. We've heard of corporate layoffs, specifically in tech, Amazon and Google, and there are some investors who believe that the U.S. Federal Reserve will not pull back on the tightening mode, that we will have higher for longer interest rates. So again, a lot of different data points, and that is still very much what it is, looking at the data points. Some specific comments and takeaways perhaps from the fourth quarter. You are hearing from company CEOs that the headwinds of 2022 were very much the higher input costs as well as supply chains, but perhaps that's normalizing a bit. So a bit of a positive as we head into 2023 results. And also away from that, the CEOs are certainly still talking about the uncertainty as it relates to the economic environment. In terms of company-specific stories, I would point out that Alcoa did miss on their earnings front. Revenue was in line, but they are noticing higher costs. And as it relates to the TSX, it is trending a bit lower today, but little change essentially following 2 straight weeks of gains. So some nice gains here. Wholesale sales in Canada increased by 0.5%, much lower than expected. And we did see WTI, of course, that helps the energy sector here on the TSX, having some real strength as of late, but it did break an 8 days of gains. A CPI in Canada did pull back a little bit to 6.3% from about 6.8%, very much in line with expectations, but you're hearing from economists and investors that they do not believe that that downward trend will prevent the BOC, the Bank of Canada, from raising rates next week. So continue to be aware that the view is that we will continue in Canada and also likely the United States to see rate increases. As it relates to corporate news, Hudson's Bay has announced that they are going to be relaunching the discount retailer or discount brand Zellers in about 25 locations across Canada. And in terms of upgrades and downgrades, Canaccord has downgraded to hold Alamos Gold as well as Newmont, and Nutrien was initiated equal weight over at Wells Fargo. Nima, I'll leave it there. Certainly a lot going on in the markets. It does feel a little bit more positive, I have to say, to start the year, but we'll see where we go from here. Again, all eyes on the Fed and the BOC over the next 2 weeks, and of course, corporate earnings. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. Stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Stay with us. The world continues to react to the resignation of New Zealand's Prime Minister. Jacinda Ardern announced that she would step down as the country's leader next month. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau extended his thanks to Ms. Ardern for what she has done for Canada. This while Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese thanked her for her partnership and friendship. Ms. Ardern shocked many with her announcement today that she will leave office after leading New Zealand for 5.5 years. She said every moment leading her country was a privilege, but she didn't have enough in reserve to seek another term. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to press ahead with unpopular pension reforms that will raise the country's retirement age. This comes despite massive protests and nationwide strikes. During a news conference on Thursday at a French-Spanish summit in Barcelona, Mr. Macron said, quote, "We must do that reform. We will do it with respect, in a spirit of dialogue, but also determination and responsibility." Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has bared his frustration about not obtaining enough tanks from some Western countries to help defend against Russian forces. He spoke at a breakfast on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum's annual gathering in Davos, Switzerland. The Ukrainian leader offered a veiled critique of countries like Germany, Poland, and the United States for hesitating about sending tanks. Canada's defense minister was in Kyiv yesterday announcing 200 new armored vehicles were being sent to Ukraine, but she did not say anything about tanks. All right, well, this comes as Russia and China plan to hold naval drills off the coast of South Africa. The drills will happen in the Indian Ocean, and they are just another indication of the strengthening relationship between Moscow, Beijing, and Africa's most developed country. The South African Armed Forces confirmed that all three countries will take part in a multinational maritime exercise from February 17th to the 27th. The drills will happen around the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Turning to the Philippines now, where President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. says the long-ranging disputes in the South China Sea have kept him up at night. He said this in comments at a World Economic Forum dialogue in Davos. He said that a war in Asia, like the fighting in Ukraine, would be disastrous to the world. Mr. Marcos said the dispute keeps you up at night and you have to pay attention to it. The value of the Lebanese pound has hit an all-time low, now trading at 50,000 to the US dollar. It comes as the country's deeply divided parliament failed to elect a president for an 11th time. The cash-strapped country's national currency was once valued at 1,500 to the dollar, but it has been tanking since late 2019 and has since lost over 90% of its value. The financial crisis has plunged 3/4 of the population into poverty. Experts blame the country's entrenched ruling elites for decades of corruption and financial mismanagement. Well, it looks like Lunar New Year tourism hopes are fizzling in Asia as most travelers are opting to stay in China. Tour operators say throngs of Chinese tourists, often seen on the beaches in Bali or on the ski slopes of Hokkaido, Japan, before the pandemic, have not yet returned. It's a bitter disappointment for many businesses, which had been hoping that lean pandemic times were over after Beijing relaxed restrictions on travel and stopped requiring weeks-long quarantines. Prosecutors in New Mexico are charging actor Alec Baldwin with involuntary manslaughter. This is in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer on the set of the movie Rust in October 2021. Helena Hutchins died shortly after being shot during rehearsals at a ranch on the outskirts of Santa Fe. Mr. Baldwin was pointing a pistol at Miss Hutchins when the gun went off, killing her and wounding director Joel Souza. He has described the killing as a tragic accident. Researchers say Greenland is the warmest it's been in more than 1,000 years. Scientists that are studying ice core data have identified a spike in temperatures between 1995 and 2011. They say warming in Greenland in the past may have been masked by local weather variability, but not anymore. The study's lead author says this is a clear signal of climate change. King Charles III has asked that profits from a $1 billion a year Crown Estate wind farm deal be used for public good. The windfall would normally be used to support the activities of the monarchy. The Crown Estate confirmed on Thursday that it had signed lease agreements for 6 offshore wind projects. Buckingham Palace says King Charles wants the money to go to helping the public make ends meet amid soaring inflation. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, or follow us on our social media handles. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.